Markets were told to expect a hawkish new Fed chair. Gold sold off, investors adjusted their expectations, and confidence in the dollar got another boost. But what if that entire narrative misses the real story? If the Fed's primary job isn't controlling inflation but protecting government debt and the financial system, what does that mean for your savings, your retirement, and your future purchasing power of the dollar? Today, I'm joined by Dr. Mark Thornton of the Mises Institute to unpack that question and where he believes the economy is headed next.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. How you all doing today?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to VRIC Media, your most trusted voice in metals and mining. I'm your host, Daryl Thomas, and today we have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Mark Thornton of the Mises Institute. How you doing today, Mark?
Daryl, I'm doing good. It's good to be back on your show.
Yes, of course. I love having our discussions because they're about real issues and real issues that impact the Main Street economy as well as people all over our country. And so I always appreciate our discussions. So to start us off, I want to start with the Fed. Okay, so there was this narrative painted that the Fed was going to be, Kevin Warsh was going to be so hawkish. And it seems like the market may be sniffing out that the Fed is bluffing, and I know that Warsh wants to prevent like messages going out to the markets and influencing the markets because over the past, I don't know how long, but the Fed, different Fed chairs speaking and influencing markets in one way or the other. I want to get your thoughts, and what are you thinking about when you're seeing this dynamic with the new Fed chair?
I think the appointment of Kevin Warsh was a hit job on the gold market. The day he was appointed, gold and silver fell tremendously because of this hawkish reputation that he has. He was certainly the most hawkish of the four candidates that President Donald Trump was considering to appoint as chairman of the Fed. But I've been saying all along that I didn't think he was going to raise interest rates. He didn't want to raise interest rates, and that he was likely facing the prospects of cutting rates rather than raising them, and that inflation-adjusted interest rates are very, very low right now. But in the event of some market crash or terrible external event or something internal to the banking industry, a collapse of a sector like housing or private credit, and the interest rate cuts from the Fed, I believe, are going to come fast and furious. And so they've been playing this game of perception, which they try to do with every new incoming chairman of the Fed. And I just saw right through that. I didn't think that he was going to be hawkish. I didn't think he was going to address the problem of inflation. It's still well over 3%. It's expected, CPI is expected to be over 3% on this week, and moving forward, if there is a slight downtick in CPI inflation, it's going to be because of the short-term cutback in the price of gasoline. But longer term, there's more money, therefore there's going to be higher prices, and I don't see Kevin Warsh really being able to do much about that. Mm-hmm.
So do you think this is any way similar to when Jerome Powell was nominated? I know he came in pretty hawkish. I think it was about, 2018, where the Fed was talking about raising rates, or I think they may have raised rates a couple of times or something of that nature. The market freaked out, and then when we had the pandemic hit, they pretty much pivoted and did an about face and started printing trillions of dollars. And so Jerome Powell was always seen as a hawk, but under that immense amount of pressure, he caved into the pressure. And so curious if you think this could be a similar type dynamic.
Yeah, that's a great question, Daryl. And I think that's really how the operation of money printing has gone on for a long time, present a hawkish image to the general public and to the investors in the economy and to the financial industry, and get them thinking with expectations that they're going to keep a cap on inflation and money supply and interest rates and so on and so forth. But, the Fed's real mandate is not unemployment and the inflation rate. The Fed's real mandate is making sure the government finances its debt on the one hand, and it's also protecting banks, Wall Streets, and stock markets on the other. So they'll talk a lot about, the unemployment rate, and they'll talk a lot about CPI, but their main overriding concern is going to be with the government's ability to finance the national debt. And of course, right now, that's a very important question with $40 trillion in debt, the interest rate on government bonds rising, and the interest expense really exploding over the last couple of years. And refinancing all that debt at even higher rates is really going to undermine the financial ability of the American economy. And so they're very interested in that. And then, of course, they all come from the banks and Wall Street and academia that's beholden to Wall Street and the Fed. So they're very much concerned about that. And they talk about, the systemic importance of banks, the systemic importance of Wall Street and financing and that sort of thing. So they're going to come to the rescue to whatever crisis that comes about. And of course, you and I have been anticipating some kind of breakage in the economy, some kind of black swan, some kind of denouement in bond markets, especially to take place. So we're just waiting and seeing how this is all going to turn out.
Mm-hmm. So earlier you said you think that the appointment of Kevin Warsh was a hit job on the gold market. What is the threat of gold to the powers that be, to the government, to the Fed? When gold is rising, how does that threaten them?
Well, symbolically, it's terrible for the government. It's terrible for the U.S. government and the Treasury, the value of the dollar, really everything. It's the symbol of fear in the population, the symbol of inflation in the population, the symbol of tough times ahead in the economy. And so symbolically and in a very real sense, it spells trouble for the Fed and the Treasury and the government itself. And they know very well that people around the world, that there are more and more individuals holding gold and silver as a precaution against inflation, war, and other things that the government is doing. That's especially true in Asia, China, India, Turkey, the Middle East, many other places. And then, of course, even central banks, other central banks other than the United States, have been running away from the dollar and have been putting more and more of their asset money in gold rather than in U.S. Treasuries. That says that's a big story to the world economy, that some central banks no longer trust other central banks like the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank and the Bank of Japan, which is under an enormous microscope right now. It's in serious trouble, experiencing price inflation for the first time in many years in Japan, wage inflation for the first time in many years. The value of the yen is falling, and the interest rate on long-term Japanese bonds has increasing. It's broken out to historic levels. And so, all of these things point in the same direction. The government is doing the wrong thing across the board. It's systemic within government, and that's particularly true here in the United States. The leading economy is behaving in in the way of a drunken sailor spending money and not really addressing any kind of fiscal constraint.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that so when Warsh was appointed, there was a big narrative about the debasement trade, get out of the dollar, they're going to inflate the dollar. And, I'm thinking that, the government wants to either dupe people or trick people to have confidence in the establishment or confidence in the system, confidence in the dollar and such. And so do you think that could have been a reason where they appointed a hawkish, somewhat what's assumed to be hawkish chair to say, yeah, we can't have this narrative out there?
Oh, I think that's exactly what it is. And confidence, it's a confidence game. And there are members of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve out there giving speeches on a monthly basis all around the country to important business leaders in banking, finance, insurance, and so on, and telling people that the economy is good, that the Federal Reserve is powerful, the Federal Reserve is the inflation-fighting agency of the government, when in fact it's the inflator of the government. And it said, and they go out there and tell people everything's going to be okay, and if anything does come up, the Federal Reserve will act and save the day. And, you can read their speeches. They're giving those speeches every week, every month, to important business groups, selling this confidence game, which means, a confidence game is where you're getting taken for a ride when somebody's telling you a story about one thing that isn't really completely true or may be completely false. But that's how the Fed operates. They want to manage expectations. A lot of people in the Fed even talk about managing expectations. Powell was the master of managing expectations. He did come in as a hawk. He obviously inflated at any turn in a very massive way. And that's the typical story that, they appoint people coming in and they're, inflation hawks and they're going to be tough, and ultimately they do what's necessary to work for the government and work for the banks and Wall Street, that they ultimately are the ones that are protected, and the average consumer is not protected from price inflation and does not benefit from protecting banks or protecting Wall Street, or certainly not for making it easier for the government to borrow unlimited sources of money. So that's really almost a fairy tale that the media has foisted on the American public. And it's amazing to me that the effectiveness of that fairy tale remains so strong today, that everybody on Wall Street is living and breathing and crying and dying on the slightest change in perception about the expectations of what the Fed may or may not do, when we have a very uniform record of what they're going to do, what they're going to try to do, which is keep borrowing costs really low, which is going to help not only the government, but it's going to help Wall Street and asset holders a great deal. But it's ultimately who's going to pay the bill? It's going to be mom and pop. It's going to be the working class out there who are paying higher prices for the goods and services that they buy.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely want to get to that with the average American. So I'm always looking for sentiment and such, especially when I'm on social media. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this. So Rand Paul had tweeted out that he went to Fort Knox and he saw the gold. Many people were upset. Many people I watch in this space and I respect were like challenging that claim and saying, where's the proof? Is the gold there? And such. And so do you think the gold is in Fort Knox? I just had to bring that up because it was on social media and people were, and Rand Paul, somebody who, I really love Ron Paul's work. I have his book In the Fed, and and then Rand Paul is like one of the few politicians that I actually watch and like to listen to that has some common sense on in that particular space. And so curious in your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, Daryl. But I do believe that gold is in Fort Knox and other depositories in the United States. But observation could be some of the most leading information that there is, whether you're, a witness to a murder or you're trying to recall what happened at a party last Saturday night. Observation can be very misleading in all contexts. So just going to see gold in a particular place in a particular amount does not give me any more confidence in the dollar today than I had before Rand went to see that depository. How much gold is there? What's the purity of the gold? How much has it been encumbered, leased out, or otherwise reallocated for other purposes? I mean, the private sector commits crimes in over-representing its assets. Certainly the government would do that. And would they really ever use that gold in any tangible way? Would they use gold to support, would they sell off gold to support the U.S. dollar? I don't think so. I think that if they tried to sell off gold to support the U.S. dollar or to finance expenditures or anything like that, it's really a drop in the bucket compared to the size of our problems. And again, perception of the government, disclosing bad information or selling off its gold or even revaluating it, it's not going to cause a lot of big increases in people's confidence. So I think that's a little bit of a misdirection. A normal business would have no problem disclosing information about itself, its inventories, its assets, things of that nature. But government wants to keep this particular thing relatively secret. Why hasn't there been an audit? An official, legitimate outside audit of something that is considered by a lot of Americans as part of the strength of America and the American economy. Why not do that? And I think that the fact that they're not willing to answer those kind of questions and actually answer them is indicative of the type of people that we're dealing with today. The people who are not really representatives of the people, but people who feel that they are more or less our rulers, or the representatives of the ultimate rulers of the people, not their representatives. So I think it's symbolic of how bad the political landscape is in the United States and why 2/3 of Americans oppose their government. They're just not, they don't just have negative views of their Congress, their Senate, and their president and so forth. They have oppose what they're doing across the board, hands up or hands down. The American people, 2/3 of them say hands down.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on that. And I mean, if he went, like, I'm glad somebody went and at least took a peek at it. But, I highly doubt he counted the 277 million, whatever, that he stated was in there, but I mean, at least
no, he got the figures wrong. He got he didn't know what the number was, and he didn't really correctly specify if he was talking about ounces or troy ounces or 90% purity or pure gold. That's the flim flam, and I'm a little bit surprised that he didn't really take a more serious stance on all of that, and that unless he was sending us some kind of cryptic message, I think he should have taken it a lot more seriously.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because a lot of gold bugs were pretty upset, and so I had to ask you about that. You mentioned the distrust for the government, and about 2/3 of Americans disapprove. I'm curious about like your thoughts on the younger generations. It seems like they're seeing the swamp play out on both sides, and we saw that under Joe Biden. We're seeing it under Donald Trump and such. And so some people are calling for a third party, and we know that third parties are, I mean, we get like 10 of them, right, on the ballot. So I'm just like, man, like what is the solution to this issue? And I'm kind of wondering about how the younger generation is thinking about that. And so I just want to hear your thoughts on, like, are you hearing some of this from either like your students, like their perspective on this, or what do you think, the younger generation is gonna do? Like, are they gonna want more socialism? Like, what are you thinking? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I'm very concerned about the younger generation. I love the younger generation. I get to work with a lot of young people. We just had a great summer with undergraduate students and graduate students, and some of our members and donors as well. So we had a great summer here, and it's very uplifting to see the interest of these young people in the ideas of liberty, freedom, and free market economics. But, there's a broad concern, and, as much as we've gained ground percentage-wise with young people, the other side, the dark side, has gained even more in terms of young people wanting to support socialism, as an economic system. But I think, Daryl, the interesting thing is that libertarians, independents, and these national socialist people who want nationalized industries, they want national health insurance, they want government completely taking over, the paying for college and the paying for health insurance. I think we all share, at a fundamental level, a similar concern. Libertarians are concerned about the size of government, how much it spends, how it's invading our privacy and our lives and our investments, and we're worried about the future. We're worried about the national debt. We're worried about the implications for Social Security, and the list goes on and on. And younger people have a similar, that are leaning towards socialism. They're seeing that higher education is broken. It's way, way expensive. The expense has gotten out of control. They're looking at healthcare where it's broken. It's not making us healthier. It's just getting more and more expensive so that people can't afford health insurance. So they want a government solution. Libertarians want sort of the anti-government solution. They want a free market solution. So we're all seeing the same thing. And, of course, independents, thinking independently, they also realize that government is out of balance, out of sync with the middle class. And so it's really across the board. We're all seeing the same problem of too much government, too much power in government, too much control over our daily lives. It's just that these young people who aren't exposed to real economics, they're exposed to more like socialist ideology and socialist economics growing up in public schools, in colleges. That's what they're seeing, and then you've got Bernie Sanders and AOC, and then all these Winnie Mamdani in New York City, and it's spreading because these young people want to draw attention to their concerns. And I see it, I feel it, I know it's true. They just are hitting on the wrong solution. But I can feel for them. They see the cards that are stacked against them, things that my generation did. We put Social Security out of balance. We put the size of government out of balance. We allowed health care to become controlled by government, and most people have their health expenditures paid by government, so it's controlled by government, and the costs have run amok, and it's really geared not to health care, but managing people getting sicker and sicker with more and more drugs and prescriptions and so on and so forth, but less healthy people. So, the picture is pretty clear to everybody, but we're not all in sync in terms of what is the cause and what is the solution.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned your generation. So I was reading David Stockman's The Triumph of Politics, and he talks about when the Kemp-Roth tax cuts were implemented in the 80s, how the government cut taxes, but they didn't cut spending, and then pretty much the politicians they weren't willing to cut their constituents' benefits and such. And so do you think that's just going to be a indefinite thing where the politicians are looking to serve their constituents and they're not willing to make any sacrifices or cut spending because otherwise they wouldn't have a job? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. But it's not just constituents. They're not so much concerned about constituents. They need their votes. And so they don't want to cut Social Security. They want to increase Social Security. They don't want to bring cost of health care under control. They want to add more money everywhere possible, essentially. But, I came of voting age when David Stockman became a congressman. I watched him as director of the budget. I know David Stockman now. He's a great guy, very, very smart. I mean, he knows everything about everything, I think. But when he was there, they were going to cut taxes, which is great. IRAs and a lot of positive things. But he presented the cabinet with a balanced budget, and they just laughed him out of the room and said, you're going to have to come back with something serious, because not only are we not going to cut all these agencies and eliminate all this waste, fraud, and abuse, and a lot of programs too, which is really necessary. You have to eliminate programs entirely, things that actually hit voters. But they wanted to increase military spending, and they wanted to launch new programs and spend more money in a lot of other areas. And that's what, that's why David, essentially had to quit, because he entered the Reagan administration with the understanding that they actually wanted in a revolutionary way, bring about a conservative result, which is balancing the budget at a much lower level and start trying to figure out what is the most important things for government to do, not that it should do everything for all people at all times and just continually increase spending. And so I know he was very disappointed. That's why he wrote the book and explained what happened, and why he continues to work on his own and with the Mises Institute and on Twitter and so forth to try to bring attention to these issues, because he knows, I know, you know, that if we don't do something about it, the standard of living for the working class is going to continue to deteriorate.
Mm-hmm. What are the most common misconceptions of capitalism that you hear?
Well, there's a lot of them. One is that it exploits workers. It's based on the labor theory of value that goes back into antiquity. Adam Smith had a labor theory of value rather than a subjective theory of consumer valuations. And so it's really off on the wrong foot. But when they see production, they see that labor only gets part of the return on sales of production, and that somehow these entrepreneurs and these capitalists exploit labor by digging out money out of the process. Well, in reality, we know, everybody knows, that entrepreneurs are a vital force in the economy, that you have to have bosses, that you have to have managers, that you have to have innovators, you have to have leaders, or nothing is going to be successful. And successful entrepreneurs working with capitalists who finance business ventures out there in the economy, and they invest more in the firm, makes labor more productive and results in higher wages. So communists and socialists think that workers are being exploited by entrepreneurs and capitalists, when in fact it's the very opposite. It's entrepreneurs and capitalists that are making workers more productive and leading to higher wages. And of course, the era of capitalism was when the standard of living took off, and why the average person now is much wealthier and much better off, lives longer, and under better circumstances than the kings and queens of 1,000 years ago. The standard life before capitalism was nasty, brutish, and short, where people were all living at subsistence, and where the government, the kings and queens, were exploiting the population so that they could elevate their own standard of living. So, prior to capitalism, the political class exploited the working class with taxes and so forth, just the way they do today. But capitalism, with entrepreneurs and capitalists who finance things, actually made us so productive and made labor so highly demanded with new technology and higher productivity that wage rates have gone up enormously under capitalism. And we see that, like in China and India, in a very short period of time, capitalists and entrepreneurs were unleashed. Capitalists came in and financed a massive expansion of factories and productivity, and the wage rates in China just skyrocketed from subsistence to middle class and beyond. So reality just tells a completely different story than the story that the socialists and the communists would like to portray.
Yeah. I have a couple of friends, colleagues that I've worked with who align more socialist, and I got friends on all sides of the spectrum, from Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, capitalist, socialist. I don't discriminate. So I got friends all over the place, and I like to have these debates and these conversations in a productive way that I can hear their concerns and they can hear my concerns. And I was talking to a colleague of mine about the tax the rich philosophy and such, and they were like, yeah, I think the rich should be taxed. And then I said, okay, well, if we tax them at 100%, all the billionaires, we'll only fund government spending for a year, and we'll still have the problem of debt deficits and government. And then you got the waste, fraud, and abuse, you got to worry about. And that's assuming that the government is going to do what's ethical and give that to the people, like if that's what they say they're going to do. And so, it's all these different dynamics. And I noticed that whenever I'm engaging with someone who's aligned on more of the socialist side of things, they don't look at the economics or like they're not looking at the fiscal situation. They're not looking at the debt situation or anything around the numbers. They just kind of lean more on their ideas as being like the right thing for people, but they don't look at the reality of the economic side. Is that something that you experience too when you're engaging with people?
Oh, yes. I have friends all across the political spectrum, and I tend not to debate with them for fear that I would lose a lot of those friends. I prefer to save my debate energy for online and, of course, doing interviews and talks and things like that. And I answer questions when people ask me questions. But we do not have a taxation problem in the United States. Tax revenues are at an all-time high. They've been rising very rapidly over many, many years. There's only slight sagging in the trend lines of tax revenues during recessions and things of that nature. So we don't have a tax problem. We have a spending problem. And government spending, along with the waste, fraud, and abuse that comes along with it, means that spending has grown much, much faster than the tax revenues coming in. And you're right, Daryl. I mean, you can't. You could tax everything that the wealthy had, and you wouldn't really pay for much at all, and you would ruin the economy if the reward for serving customers better than anybody in the economy is having all of the resulting wealth taken away, you're really going to destroy the economy, and history has seen that already. If the logic doesn't ring true with you, certainly history would. And in terms of taxes, people in the bottom 50% of income earners in the United States pay zero income taxes or less. They pay zero income taxes or less. Now they pay, Social Security taxes, sales taxes, state income taxes. They do pay taxes. But in terms of the income, the progressive income tax, the bottom 50% pay nothing or less. In other words, they get money back. Whereas the top 10% pay more than 50% of all of the income tax. So it's not like we're not getting a lot of tax revenues over people with high incomes. Like say over $250,000 a year, we're getting an enormous amount of income taxes out of all of those people. In fact, anybody over like $120,000 is paying a very large sum for income taxes. They're paying capital gains taxes. They're paying, higher taxes into the Social Security system, and very often paying higher health insurance premiums. So that really is not our problem. The facts support that contention. The wealthy, the high income earners simply pay most of the income taxes to the federal government. And while everybody is paying taxes, to one extent or another, you can't avoid it. I mean, they tax everything, right? So nobody can avoid paying taxes, but it's a misnomer. It's incorrect to say that the wealthy are somehow not paying their fair share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What do you think happens with Social Security? So people, me, I'm 38. I mean, we got younger people paying into the system and such, and I know that the trust is supposed to run out in the next 6 years, maybe 7 years. Legislation around it hasn't been touched since the 80s, I believe, um, and we don't have enough people paying into it. So, do you think this is something that the age is going to be increased to infinity before before you can receive those benefits, or younger people that haven't reached that retirement age are just going to lose out, or is it going to be inflated away? Curious in your thoughts on that.
Well, the red ink is already starting to run on the Social Security programs, which include Medicaid, Medicare, disability, and so on. The red ink is already running. The false assets of Social Security are just IOUs from the federal government. So there's no money there. There's never been any money there. People think of it as a retirement fund, but that's a complete misnomer. This is a slush fund for politicians to spend in the here and now. And I don't expect any, the current group in Congress to do anything meaningful to reform or transform that system into something that's fiscally responsible but takes care of at least the most vulnerable people stuck in the system. But any of the anticipated reforms like, increasing the tax rates or the amount of income that can be taxed into the system, or extending the retirement ages, that's not going to, the young people can see right through that's not going to help them one single bit. That's like, but on the other hand, everybody loves IRAs. Everybody loves the Roth IRA. They love their individual retirement accounts, and all of that. So I think that any type of reform has to make a better access for people to save money in a tax-free fashion that is beyond the reach of government. And the one thing that I am very hot on is the idea that people should be able to save money in a bank, or more importantly, save gold in a gold account at a bank, tax-free, so that there's no income tax on any of that, and that there's no capital gains tax on the gold that's in these accounts, and that they can be used freely. Not only would that help the younger generation and people save for a legitimate retirement program like the IRAs and the Roths and so on and so forth, but if people could hold gold in a bank account, which I do, I hold gold and silver in a bank account, but if I sell it, I have to pay a capital gains tax. So if we could take that capital gains tax off of there, if we could take the income tax off of interest income earned at a bank, or even dividends earned on stocks, you would put pressure on the Fed not to inflate. You'd put pressure on the Treasury to maintain the value of the dollar, and you'd encourage the financial sector to funnel individuals into more conservative investments that earn dividends and that sort of thing, rather than these high-flying tech stocks that may never earn a dividend, for the next 20 years, and may not be even in existence in 20 years. So it would do a lot of great things for a lot of people, as well as make the economy more stable.
Yeah, I totally agree. I never heard that idea before. I mean, if they could just incentivize people to save in other ways, whether that be through increasing Roth IRA contributions more significantly, or like you mentioned, being able to hold gold in an account and remove capital gains from it and such. I mean, those are some creative ideas. And that's
Yeah,
something
and
I wish they would do.
I think a big problem with the middle class of America, the working class, is not only that they facing higher prices, but they have no savings, they have no assets to be leveraged, and they have no savings. And I think we need to change the system so that not only can people afford what they're buying, but also they have legitimate avenues to save money for the future. And if we get the middle class and the lower classes being able to save for their future, they'll be more future-oriented, and America will be not just wealthier and more productive, and we'll have lower interest rates, and the economy will be more stable over time. So we need to push back on what the government is forcing us into and push forward with an agenda of sound money and limited government.
Mm-hmm. So as we wrap up, Dr. Mark, I'm kind of wondering if you think that there's still hope for this system. I mean, some people, want to remain optimist, and see a way forward. Others believe that there's no point in it, and I'm kind of wondering your thoughts and how you. You've been doing this work for a long time, and it seems like we keep drifting further and further away from capitalists and free market capitalism and libertarian values and freedom and property. It seems like it's like a constant attack on like what we value, and so I'm kind of wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, you would think the way I have to talk negative about so many things in the world that I wouldn't be optimistic, but I am a raging optimist because, for many years now, working at the Mises Institute, I've seen just a intense interest by young people in college and high school and going to graduate school in free market economics and the Austrian School of Economics, which is a little bit old-fashioned, traditional, and conservative, but it's radical at the same time in terms of how we view the economy in its best state. And so I see these young people and their interest, and I see an expansion in percentage terms of these type of young people in the economy. So yes, socialism is really hot in the last couple of years because of that, but there's also been a lot of growth in the direction of Austrian free market economics as well. And there's tremendous dissatisfaction with the status quo politically and with the government. 2/3 of Americans are against the government, what it's doing. And they've seen the government just trot on their rights and ignore their duties to represent the American population. They've seen COVID and the vaccines and the arrogance of Fauci. They've seen, what's going on in the current administration, what they did to Representative Massey, and they're just fed up with it. And they see it and they realize, hey, there's something wrong there. So I am a raging optimist, and I feel like it's really just a matter of time before we get to sound money. I think it's very, very important that we succeed in the area of ideas and ideology of those ideas to reform government and not have a revolution, for example, because that lets the radicals in the door. But the type of ideological revolution that has occurred in far-flung places like China and India and Russia and Eastern Europe and pockets of South America, pockets in Africa, that is becoming a high growth, high entrepreneurial area. So the most of the world is moving in the right direction, and a sizable part of the young leadership class in the United States that knows these ideas is also making its presence felt. So that's why I am an optimist.
That's good. That's good. Well, you've given me hope today, Dr. Mark. Where could people connect, find more information, follow you, give them all that information?
Yeah, I have a short podcast on Saturday mornings called Minor Issues, MINOR. You can find that at Mises.org. And if you go to our homepage at Mises.org, at the top of the homepage, there's going to be a link where you can request a free copy of this book by Murray Rothbard, which is The Case for a 100% Gold Dollar. And Rothbard worked on the original, ghost wrote the original Minority Report for the Gold Commission that Ronald Reagan commissioned when David Stockman was there. You know, you had people like Stockman and Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell and Murray Rothbard, this was a great class of people, but they were teeny compared to what we have today. But you can learn a lot from Rothbard's pamphlet, and I encourage everybody to come to the webpage, click the link, and sign up for a free copy or multiple copies for that matter.
Yeah. Okay. Well, appreciate you for saying that. You all be sure to go check out Mises.org. Also love to have you subscribe to the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, we'd love to have your support. And also click the link in the description to the Commodity University and check us out. All right, Dr. Mark, we'll talk soon.
Very good, Daryl. Great to be on.
If you enjoyed this interview today and found it valuable, I encourage you to click the link that is pinned in the comments as well as the description to the Commodity University as we go deeper into what drives commodities and commodity pricing. And we also jump into different dynamics of this industry. And so I encourage you to click that link to learn more. Go check it out.